Welcome back to Russian Khton. Today's original story takes us to the deceptive paradise of the Russian South, where a single recipe cracks open a dark labyrinth of betrayal, fake identities, and living ghosts. Let's begin.
The heavy, rhythmic clatter of the train wheels against the iron tracks sounded like a metronome counting down the end of a very long, very dark era in Olga's life. She sat on the lower bunk of a Platz cart, the third-class sleeper carriage of a Russian train, a rolling, communal village where 50 strangers share a single open car, breathing the same air thick with the smell of instant noodles, smoked sausage, and the damp wool of cheap blankets. Outside the dusty window, the endless, hypnotic expanse of the Russian South rolled by. Fields of sunflowers, dilapidated concrete bus stops, and the occasional dacha, the quintessential summer house, often just a crooked wooden shack surrounded by meticulously tended potato beds. "Mom, look, is that the sea?" asked 7-year-old Masha, her nose pressed so hard against the glass that the tip turned white. "Not yet, Moya Koroshaya, my sweet," Olga smiled, gently stroking her daughter's unruly blonde hair. "That's just a river. The sea is still a little ways away." Olga leaned back against the coarse wall of the train car, closing her eyes. It was the first time in 3 years she had allowed herself to go on a vacation. For 3 years, she had lived inside a self-constructed sarcophagus of grief. She was 34, but often felt like a ghost haunting her own life. 3 years ago, her husband, Anton, a brilliant, obsessive chef and a rising star in the Moscow restaurant scene, had gone on a solo trip to the Red Sea. He had a passion for deep-water diving, claiming the absolute silence of the depths was the only place he could think of new recipes. He went down on a Tuesday morning. He never came back up. The authorities found his rented gear on the shore, and a week later, they officially declared him lost at sea. There was no body, no funeral, just an empty coffin of bureaucracy, endless paperwork, and a gaping, suffocating hole in Olga's chest. How do you explain death to a 4-year-old? Olga couldn't, so she lied. She told Masha that Papa was a culinary explorer, that he had embarked on a secret, years-long expedition to the farthest corners of the earth to find the rarest recipes. "He is looking for the magical golden saffron, Mashyunya," Olga would whisper at night, swallowing her own tears. "And when he finds it, he will come back." But now, 3 years later, Olga had finally decided it was time to stop waiting for ghosts. She had booked a week-long trip to Gelendzhik, a resort town on the Black Sea coast. The town was currently hosting a massive gastronomic festival, a subtle nod to her past life, a test to see if she could be around the world of high cuisine without breaking down. "New life," Olga whispered to herself, the clatter of the wheels masking her words. "We start a new life today." Stepping off the train at the Novorossiysk terminal was like walking into a wall of solid, fragrant heat. The air of the bustling port city smelled of hot metal, salt, and blooming oleander, because the steep, unforgiving coastal mountains blocked the railway from going any further south. Getting to Gelendzhik required a drive. They took a marshrutka, a cramped, yellow minibus where passengers passed coins forward to the driver in a chain of silent cooperation. The ride was an adventure in itself. The rattling vehicle wound its way through the massive industrial sprawl of the Novorossiysk dry port before climbing onto the breathtaking, dizzying mountain serpentine. Out the window, the vast, shimmering expanse of the Semes Bay dropped away into the open sea. By the time they finally descended into Gelendzhik's horseshoe-shaped bay, the air had shifted, smelling intoxicatingly of the sharp, resinous scent of the Pitsunskaya sosna, the ancient, long-needled pines that clung to the rocky shores. The resort town was a chaotic, charming collision of eras. Grand, decaying Soviet sanatoriums with imposing colonnades stood next to glitzy new seafood restaurants built from glass and steel. Along the Naberezhnaya, the miles-long pedestrian promenade, the air was thick with the smoke of roasting shashlik, skewers of marinated pork sizzling over open coals, mixing with the thumping bass of cheap pop music and the shrieks of children eating melting ice cream. For the first 2 days, Olga actually felt happy. The heavy stone of grief in her chest seemed to erode under the southern sun. She bought Masha ridiculous inflatable flamingos, ate overly sweet church kala, strings of walnuts dipped in thickened grape juice, and let the sea wash away the fatigue of 3 years of single motherhood. On the third evening, the culinary festival reached its peak. The promenade was lined with white tents where chefs from all over the coast showcased their art. Olga, holding Masha's sticky hand, wandered past mountains of local oysters, pyramids of farm cheeses, and massive vats of fragrant pilaf. At the very edge of the festival, nestled under the shadow of a massive pine tree, stood a sleek, minimalist pavilion belonging to a restaurant named Lazur. There was no loud music here, no shouting barkers, just a quietly intense atmosphere and a chalkboard offering a single tasting dish, Black Sea Rapana, with wild garlic and tarragon foam. Olga stopped dead in her tracks. The rapana is a tough, predatory sea snail common in the Black Sea. Most locals just boil it in heavily salted water until it tastes like a rubber tire, drowning it in mayonnaise. But the description on the board, the specific pairing of wild garlic, known locally as cheremsha, and a delicate tarragon foam, it couldn't be. It was Anton's recipe. It was his obsession. They had spent 2 months in their cramped Moscow kitchen, Anton cursing and throwing pans, trying to break down the tough proteins of the sea snail, until he perfected a slow sous vide method that made the meat melt on the tongue, balanced perfectly by the sharp, earthy bite of the cheremsha. He had been so proud of it, planning to make it the signature dish of his new Moscow restaurant before the Red Sea. "Mommy, can we try that?" Masha pointed at the elegant plates being handed out over the counter. "It looks like sea clouds." Olga's heart was suddenly beating in her throat. A cold sweat broke out on the back of her neck despite the evening heat. "Yes," she managed to say, her voice trembling. "Yes, let's try it." She paid for the tasting portion. A young sous chef handed her a small ceramic bowl. Olga picked up the wooden fork. Her hand was shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She took a bite. The world around her instantly vanished. The thumping music, the sound of the waves, the chatter of the tourists, it all muted into a dull hum. It was the exact same taste, not similar, not inspired by. It was absolute, microscopic perfection. The exact ratio of butter to tarragon, the exact smoky undertone of the garlic. In the culinary world, a chef's signature dish is like a fingerprint. You cannot forge it this perfectly. Olga couldn't breathe. "Excuse me?" she gasped, gripping the counter so hard her knuckles turned white. She stared wildly at the young sous chef. "Who made this? Who is your head chef?" The young man blinked, taken aback by her intensity. Our brand chef? Artur Belov. He manages Lazur up on the cliff." "Artur," Olga repeated, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. Anton had always joked that if he ever had to flee the country, he would change his name to Artur because it sounded like a pompous French king. Is he here?" she asked, her voice cracking. "No, lady, he never comes to the street tents. He's at the main restaurant. Hey, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I think I just tasted one," Olga thought. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the balcony of their cheap hotel room, chain smoking, a habit she had quit 5 years ago, watching the moonlight reflect off the black mirror of the sea. Her mind was a war zone. It's a coincidence, her rational brain screamed. Someone stole his recipe notebook. Someone worked under him in Moscow and brought it here. But her gut, the primal, undeniable intuition of a woman who had shared a bed, a life, and a child with a man, knew the truth. The next morning, Olga dropped Masha off at the hotel's kids' club, paying the animators double to keep her busy until the afternoon. She put on a wide-brimmed straw hat, large dark sunglasses, and a simple linen dress. She felt like a spy in a bad movie, but she couldn't stop herself. She walked up the steep stone steps to the cliff overlooking the bay, where Lazur sat like a glittering crown of glass and white wood. It was an expensive place, the kind of restaurant where the price of a salad equaled a provincial teacher's monthly salary. Olga found a spot on the open terrace of a much cheaper cafe next door, hidden behind a large, potted ficus, giving her a clear view of the Lazur VIP veranda and the staff entrance. She ordered an espresso and waited. She waited for 2 hours, and then, He walked out. Olga's breath hitched so violently she choked on the air. It was Anton. He was wearing a pristine white chef's jacket. He had aged. His hair was peppered with silver, and he wore a neatly trimmed beard he never had in Moscow. He was slightly tanner, slightly heavier, but the way he moved, the way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was stressed, it was him. It was the man she had mourned every single night, the man whose framed photograph stood on her nightstand with a black ribbon. He was alive. He was breathing. He was right there. A surge of emotion so powerful it felt like physical violence ripped through Olga's body. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run across the terrace, throw herself at him, and beat her fists against his chest until he explained how this was possible. Was it amnesia? Was he kidnapped? Before she could move, the glass doors of the restaurant slid open, and a woman walked out. She was young, no older than 25, with the kind of aggressive, expensive beauty that defined the modern Russian elite. Plumped lips, perfect porcelain veneers, and a body poured into a silk designer dress. She walked up to Anton, her face twisted in a mask of irritation. Because Olga was sitting barely 10 meters away, the coastal breeze carried their voices perfectly. "Artur, this is a disaster," the girl snapped, crossing her arms. "The supplier brought the wrong truffles. They smell like wet dog. I told you to control them." "Snezhana, Solnishko, sunshine," Anton said. His voice. Oh God, it was his exact voice, but the tone. It was sycophantic, appeasing, weak. Anton had never spoken to anyone like that. In his kitchen, he was a dictator. Here he sounded like a scolded schoolboy. "I'll handle it. I'll make a reduction. The aroma will shift. Don't worry." "I am worrying. My father invested 50 million rubles into this place for my birthday, Artur. I didn't make you the managing partner so you could serve wet dog to the mayor's deputies tonight." I know. I'll fix it," Anton murmured, stepping forward to hug her. She allowed it for a second, then pushed him away. "Just fix the menu, and fix your tie. You look like a loader from the market," she threw over her shoulder as she marched back inside. Anton stood there for a moment alone, staring at the ground. His shoulders slumped. He pulled a cigarette from his pocket and lit it with trembling hands. Behind the ficus, Olga sat completely frozen. The boiling cocktail of shock, joy, and panic inside her suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a cold, sharp, crystal-clear realization. No amnesia, no kidnapping. He was living here, with a young, rich patroness. He was playing the role of a tame genius for a spoiled girl whose father had bought her a restaurant. While Olga was crying over his grave, working 2 jobs to buy Masha winter boots, he was here, looking at the sea, inventing new sauces. The absolute, unfathomable betrayal of it hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. But strangely, she didn't cry. The tears she had shed for 3 years had dried up a long time ago. What replaced them was a sudden, icy, terrifying clarity. She stood up, took a 500 ruble note from her purse, dropped it on the table, and walked straight toward the VIP veranda of Lazur. Anton was just putting out his cigarette when he heard the click of her heels. He didn't look up immediately. "Excuse me, the restaurant is closed until," he began, turning around. The words died in his throat. For 10 seconds, the only sound on the veranda was the distant cry of seagulls and the rustle of the pine needles. Anton's face went through a terrifying metamorphosis. The tan drained from his skin, leaving it a sickly, chalky white. His eyes widened so far they looked like they might tear. He took a step backward, stumbling over a heavy teak chair, and fell hard onto the wooden deck. He looked at Olga, as if the devil himself had risen from the Aegean Sea to collect his soul. Olga stood perfectly still. She took off her sunglasses and looked down at him. "Hello, Artur," she said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of a judge reading a final sentence. Anton scrambled backward like a crab, pressing his back against the glass railing. Olya, my God, Olya!" he gasped, his chest heaving as if he were having a heart attack. "How, you're a hallucination. You're not here." "I'm very much here, Anton," she said, pulling out a chair and sitting down gracefully, crossing her legs. "Though I suppose it's Artur now. Tell me, Artur, how is the Red Sea? Did you find the golden saffron?" Anton put his head between his knees, hyperventilating. "Olya, please, you have to understand. I didn't want this. I didn't mean for this. You didn't mean to fake your death and leave your wife and 4-year-old daughter to mourn you for 3 years? Olga asked, tilting her head. Because from where I sit, it looks like a fairly premeditated logistical operation. So, you have exactly 5 minutes to explain yourself before I walk into that restaurant and introduce myself to your charming young Snezhana. Anton's head snapped up, pure panic in his eyes. No! Olga, please, no! She doesn't know. Nobody knows. He scrambled up from the floor, pulling up a chair across from her. He was shaking violently. He looked pathetic. The grand, brilliant maestro she had worshipped for years suddenly looked like a wet, terrified rat. Talk, Olga commanded. It was the Bratki, Anton whispered, his eyes darting around as if the ghosts of the 1990s were hiding in the bushes. The raiders. You remember when the Moscow restaurants started making huge profits? We attracted the wrong attention. Olga frowned. She knew about the concept, of course. Raidery. Corporate pirates who didn't use swords, but used forged documents, corrupt judges, and occasionally a baseball bat in a dark alley to take over successful businesses. It was a classic Russian nightmare. You told me you had a Krisha, she said, using the slang for a protective umbrella provided by either the police or the mob. You said you paid the right people. The Krisha sold me out, Anton hissed desperately. A new group came in. They wanted the restaurant, they wanted the brand, and they wanted me to sign over all the holding rights. I refused. 2 days later, they cornered me in the underground parking lot. They broke 2 of my fingers, you remember? I told you I slammed them in a car door. Olga remembered the cast. She remembered him saying it was an accident. They told me if I didn't sign the papers, they wouldn't just kill me. They would come to the apartment. They knew where Masha went to kindergarten. Olya. They knew her teacher's name. Anton was crying now, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. So why didn't we run? Olga demanded, her voice rising for the first time. Why didn't we pack our bags, grab Masha, and disappear together? We could have gone to Europe, to Asia, anywhere. Because we wouldn't have made it, Anton pleaded, grabbing the edge of the table. They were watching us. If we bought 3 tickets, if we started packing, they would have known. But if I just disappeared on a solo vacation, they would think I drowned. The debt dies with the man. They would take the restaurant from the bank, but they would leave you and Masha alone. I did it for you, Olya. I did it to save you. Olga stared at him. She let the words hang in the hot summer air. She processed the logic. On a purely pragmatic, twisted, desperate level, there was a grain of truth. By dying, he severed the mob's leverage over him, saving his family from the crosshairs. But as she looked at him, at his manicured beard, his expensive chef's jacket, and remembered the young, wealthy girl screaming at him about truffles, the noble facade crumbled. You did it to save us, Olga repeated slowly. Okay, let's assume that's true. The raiders took the restaurant. A year later, their boss was arrested for extortion. It was all over the news. The threat was gone. So why didn't you come back? Anton froze. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Why didn't you call me, Anton? Olga pressed, leaning forward, her eyes pinning him to the chair. Even anonymously? A postcard? A whisper in the night to tell me that my daughter's father wasn't fish food? I had nothing, he stammered, looking away. I was a ghost. To make the drowning believable, I had to leave my passport and wallet on that beach in Egypt. I was trapped in a foreign country with no documents, relying on the emergency cash I'd hidden in my bag. I had to bribe smugglers to get me onto a cargo ship crossing the Black Sea just to get back to Russia. I hid in the south. I lived on the streets in Sochi for a year. I washed dishes in back alley taverns for cash. I couldn't come back to you as a beggar, a failure. So you found a new sponsor, Olga finished for him, gesturing toward the glass doors of the restaurant. Snezhana, or rather, Snezhana's daddy. You sold your talent to a spoiled brat so you could live in a nice climate and play pretend. It's not like that. Not like, Anton groaned, holding his head. She's complicated, yes. When I finally saved enough cash from the streets to buy a fake passport on the black market, I became Artur Belov. I met her by chance. Her family built this place for me. They invested everything into my new name. But they own me, Olya. If I try to leave, her father will have his security people dig into my background. If they find out I'm a ghost with forged papers, they'll destroy me. I am a hostage here. You've always been a hostage, Anton, Olga said quietly. The anger was suddenly gone. In its place, a profound, sweeping wave of apathy washed over her. For 3 years, she had idealized this man. She had painted him as a tragic genius, a hero stolen by the sea. She had felt guilty every time she smiled at another man, every time she bought a new dress, thinking she was betraying his sacred memory. But looking at him now, a cowering, weak, kept man who chose comfort and cowardice over his own child, she realized something miraculous. She didn't love him anymore. The realization hit her like a breath of pure mountain air. The heavy, suffocating chains of her grief simply snapped, falling away into the dust. He wasn't a hero. He was just a pathetic, frightened man who chose the easiest path. Olga. Anton reached out, his hand trembling as he tried to touch hers. Olga, please, don't ruin this. I can send you money. I can transfer funds through a third party. I can give you everything you need. Just go back. Forget you saw me. Please, Olga, just let me stay dead. Olga looked at his hand, then up at his face. Masha is here, she said simply. Anton flinched as if she had slapped him. What? She's at the hotel down the street. She is 7 years old now. She draws pictures of you fighting sharks and exploring jungles. She thinks you are a hero. Anton began to weep. Genuine, ugly tears of shame. I can't look at her, Olga. I can't. I'm dirt. I'm nothing. Olga stood up. She smoothed the wrinkles of her linen dress. You are going to see her, Olga said. It wasn't a request. Tomorrow morning at 10, you will come to the promenade. There's a small culinary masterclass for children near the central pier. You will be there. You will wear a mask, or a hat, or whatever you need to hide from your owners. You will show my daughter how to knead dough. You will spend 1 hour with her. And if I don't? Anton whispered, terrified. If you don't, I will walk into your kitchen tomorrow at noon and tell Snezhana exactly who you are. I'll show them Masha's birth certificate and photos of Anton, the brilliant Moscow chef. You think a fake passport will save you from her father's security team when they realize their genius brand chef is a fraud who lied to their faces and dragged his Moscow mob baggage to their doorstep. I assure you they are much less forgiving than I am. Anton swallowed hard, his face turning an even paler shade of gray, nodding slowly. And after that, Olga said, putting her large sunglasses back on, I am taking my daughter home, and you can stay here in your golden cage. You died 3 years ago, Anton. Tomorrow you are just a nice chef who taught a little girl how to cook. She turned around and walked away, her heels clicking rhythmically against the wooden deck. She didn't look back. The next morning, the Gelendzhik promenade was bathed in brilliant golden sunshine. The sea sparkled like crushed diamonds, and the air smelled of salt and sweet pastries. Olga stood by the wooden railing, watching the children's culinary masterclass. Under a white canopy, a dozen kids in oversized aprons were excitedly mixing flour and water, getting it all over their faces. In the center of the group, wearing a dark baseball cap pulled low over his eyes and a generic black apron, stood Anton. He was kneeling next to Masha. He was showing her how to fold the dough, his large, scarred hands guiding her small, delicate ones. Masha was laughing, a bright, ringing sound that cut through the noise of the crowd. Anton was crying, though he hid it well, wiping his eyes with the back of his flour-covered wrist, pretending it was sweat. He told Masha a joke, and she giggled, slapping the dough hard, sending a cloud of white powder into the air. Then, reaching deep into the pocket of his apron, Anton pulled out a tiny glass jar filled with vibrant, red-gold threads. And now, he told the kids, his voice thick but steady, we add the secret of true masters, just a pinch of magical golden saffron. Masha froze. Her hands stopped moving in the flour. Her eyes went wide as saucers as she stared at the spice. She whipped her head around, searching the crowd until she finally found Olga standing by the railing. Mommy, look! Masha yelled, pointing at the tiny jar, her voice trembling with pure, unadulterated awe. This chef knows about the saffron. That means Papa is really going to find it and send us the recipe. Olga felt a tear finally slip down her cheek. She looked from her radiant daughter to Anton. He was staring back at her over the children's heads, the tiny jar trembling in his hand, realizing exactly what Olga had told their daughter to keep his memory pristine and magical. Olga watched them from 10 feet away. A tourist passing by might have thought she was just a proud mother watching a nice instructor. She felt a brief, microscopic pang in her chest, the ghost of a phantom limb, mourning the family they could have been. But it passed quickly, replaced by a solid, unbreakable warmth. She had protected Masha's fairy tale. Masha was getting a moment of magic, an emotional bridge connecting her to a father she still adored, and Olga was getting her closure. When the hour was up, the children ran to wash their hands. Anton stood by the table, covered in flour, looking completely exhausted and utterly broken. He looked up and met Olga's eyes through the crowd one last time. There was 1,000 words in that look: apology, shame, longing, and a desperate plea for forgiveness. Olga didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. She gave him a single, slow nod, a release, an absolution. She turned away, walking toward the hand-washing station where Masha was aggressively scrubbing dough off her elbows. "Mom, did you see?" Masha beamed, her face smeared with flour. "The chef said I have a natural talent. He said my dad must be a great cook to pass it on to me." "He did he?" Olga smiled, handing her a napkin. "Well, he's absolutely right. You are incredibly talented. Can we go to the beach now?" "I want to build a sand castle." "We can do whatever you want, my love. Absolutely anything." Olga took her daughter's hand, and they walked down the stone steps toward the pebble beach. The sea breeze caught Olga's hair, blowing it back from her face. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the scent of the sea, the pines, and the hot southern sun. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel the weight of the past dragging her down. The ghost was dead. The sarcophagus was empty. She was 34. She had a beautiful daughter, and ahead of her lay a vast, terrifying, beautiful life waiting to be lived entirely on her own terms.
In the end, this tale shows that the gritty reality of a golden cage can never match the strength of a soul that finally breaks free from the chains of the past. Thank you for watching. See you in next video.